We're in such a state.
We're in such a situation that we need to arm ourselves and build proper fortifications, because the Russians won't stop here.
These are the predictions Ukrainian soldiers are making ahead of the upcoming meeting between Putin and Trump in Alaska, and they insist, among other things, that a strong Ukrainian army must be a reliable guarantor of any peace agreements.
If we disarm, they'll just keep going. But if the Russians know that we have a reliable rear supporting us, and a strong army, strong armed forces, then no one will dare come here. As long as Russia doesn't suffer enough losses here to make them give up their military pressure on us, this will keep going. We can't stop this war any other way, because we're actually ready for peace right now. If they said right now, stop, we would gladly stop.
But until the leaders sit down at the negotiating table, the Russians won't stop trying to break through the Ukrainian defenses. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, 91 clashes have already been recorded since the start of the day. The enemy actively attacked in the Lyman direction and tried 19 times to push the defense forces out of their positions. Another 13 Russian assaults were recorded in the Novopavlivka sector of the front, near 7 settlements. But the most difficult situation remains in the Pokrovsk direction, where more than a third of all battles took place. Today, the enemy tried to advance in the area of about 10 settlements.
It's important to understand that this doesn't mean they've taken control of this territory. What it means is that a small group of Russians, 5 or 10 people, managed to sneak in there. And that's absolutely not how it looks on the map. And it's not like they've taken control of the entire route they've covered. No, they just passed through and tried to hide in some basement. Of course, Ukrainian reserves immediately moved in to flush them out of that basement and destroy them.
Ukrainian soldiers say that for the Russian occupiers, not only assaults but also retreats are deadly. And they add, for the Russians, both the orders from their own command and poor logistics are terrifying, as well as Ukrainian drones. They also publish footage of another precise operation by drone pilots. Meanwhile, soldiers from another Ukrainian brigade released footage of yet another failed Russian attack. Ukrainian aerial reconnaissance detected the movement of an enemy armored personnel carrier and, after striking with drones and artillery, eliminated a platoon of Russian occupiers along with their equipment. Moscow's plans also failed in the Sumy region. The day before, defense forces regained control of 2 settlements for Ukraine, Stepov and Novokostiantinivka.
Putin dreams of capturing the Sumy region, but the Russian army will end up there just like they did in Bakhmut and the Kharkiv region, stuck in the mud, without equipment, and with a few extra zeros in their casualty statistics. Sumy region is not some ceremonial marathon on Red Square. It's a fortress with trenches, minefields, and highly motivated defenders. From a statement by the command of the Air Assault Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine on Telegram.
Russian forces tried to infiltrate and gain a foothold in urban areas of the Zaporizhia region in small groups, according to the Southern Defense Forces. But Ukrainian soldiers detected and eliminated the enemy's sabotage groups in time. In total, over the past day, the Russian army lost 980 soldiers. And since the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, losses among the occupying forces have amounted to more than 1,065,000 soldiers. Russian generals will also be missing more than 24 artillery systems, 5 tanks, and 5 armored combat vehicles. The Ukrainian Armed Forces also destroyed 2 multiple rocket launch systems and 107 units of automotive and special equipment.
We're joined now by military analyst Denis Popovich. Denis, welcome to the broadcast.
Good evening.
So, Denis, let's get your take on this situation right away. Dobropillia, Pokrovsk direction. Is this situation similar to what happened recently in Pokrovsk, when sabotage groups were sent in and then gradually, systematically, so to speak, eliminated?
Well, the tactics are similar. That is, the enemy keeps building up their sabotage groups, which, taking advantage of the terrain, the folds in the landscape, tree lines, ravines, and so on, try to see through, to slip, so to speak, through the defensive lines of our troops. We saw this in Pokrovsk, we saw this in Zelenograd. We're seeing the same thing now in the Dobropillia area. In other words, the enemy managed to advance into the area of Zoloty Kolodets. That's a settlement in the Dobropillia area, east of Dobropillia. And this push started from the Nikanarivka area. So, they managed to cover about 10 to 12 kilometers this way. This kind of infiltration tactic is very inconvenient for our defense forces because, first of all, it distracts our attention. Secondly, we don't have that much infantry to respond to all of this. Now we're hearing that reinforcements have been transferred and are already in place in this area, so let's hope we'll be able to block these small enemy infantry groups that manage to break through. Why is that? Because what is the main danger of this kind of tactic? They dig in, they set up ambushes, and they wait for reinforcements. If reinforcements arrive, they'll be able to expand the area of this infiltration, meaning they'll secure their flanks. Well, then it will be very difficult to drive them out. They might manage to encircle Dobropillia from the north, cut off the main supply routes to Pokrovsk, and then, of course, defending Pokrovsk and the Murnerad agglomeration will become extremely difficult. So let's hope that we'll be able to handle this situation that has arisen.
Dennis, there's another important point. Maybe this is more of a military political question for you. At a time when, right before Alaska, on August 15th, we see the situation at the front heating up, which, by the way, intelligence had previously reported, Putin has concentrated 110,000 troops. Do you see this more as military pressure or political pressure? Because, after all, Putin isn't hiding this, and he knows perfectly well that Ukrainian intelligence communicates with the intelligence services of other countries. Moreover, even Trump himself already knows about this. In your opinion, could this be more of a political pressure tactic, showing that Putin can, if he gives the order, if he tells his soldiers to go?
Well, any negotiating position, including before the round of talks in Alaska that you mentioned, is shaped on the front lines. In other words, the situation at the front is the foundation for any negotiations and any political pressure. If the enemy manages to do what I just mentioned, that is, to encircle Dobropillia from the north and cut off the main supply routes in the Pokrovsk and Murnerad directions, then, of course, Putin will gain an additional trump card in these negotiations, which he has, in fact, been seeking with Donald Trump for so long. Therefore, without a doubt, this is pressure on the front, but it should be viewed in the context of the upcoming negotiations in Alaska. I absolutely agree with you on this.
Dobropillia, its strategic significance. You know, if you look at the map, it seems like this is quite a convenient foothold to launch a broader encirclement, specifically to surround Kostiantynivka. In your opinion, how significant is the threat to Dobropillia here, if we compare it to the Russians' intention to reach this settlement? Where is the greater threat? Well, just to speculate a bit, if we imagine the map of the Pokrovsk agglomeration or Kostiantynivka,
I would say it's more about the Pokrovsk agglomeration. As I mentioned earlier, judging by the enemy's actions and the heavy shelling currently targeting the settlements of Novovodiane and Belozersk, which are located north of Dobropillia, it seems the enemy wants to encircle this settlement, Dobropillia, from the north, cut off the 0514 and T0514 and T0515 highways, which in one way or another lead to Pokrovsk, and in this way disrupt logistics for the Pokrovsk-Murnerad agglomeration. If the enemy also manages to achieve success in the direction of Rodinsk, where there are very important tactical heights, again, for controlling logistics, then, of course, defending Pokrovsk will become extremely difficult. Therefore, I think what we're really talking about here is, first and foremost, the Pokrovsk-Murnerad agglomeration. Well, of course, it does pose a threat to Kostiantynivka, but the enemy's immediate actions won't be focused specifically on Pokrovsk.
infiltration, which we've talked about many times already, seepage, as you put it. So, well, I want to ask about the fact that any offensive should be accompanied by some kind of, armored support. Is it really possible for small infantry groups, like sabotage and reconnaissance teams and camouflage, to capture territory without the support of heavier equipment?
Well, look, if the enemy now manages to carry out this breakthrough, let's use that word, although officially the term used is infiltration, meaning the penetration of small infantry groups. But if the enemy now manages to secure the flanks and widen this breakthrough, specifically by using armored vehicles, then we will have to deal with the full range of problems I wrote about. So right now, it's a matter of days, and if we can contain and block this infiltration, these small infantry groups that have penetrated the Dobropillia area, then we will be able to celebrate success here. Right at this stage. But as you can see, it's possible. So, if we don't have a solid defensive line and the enemy tries to bypass our strongpoints using infantry that camouflages itself, constantly moves forward, uses the terrain's folds, hides, and eliminates, let's say, any witnesses to their advance, then we can see what kind of results this can lead to. Right now, the war is such that it's impossible to concentrate a large amount of equipment and big strike groups at the breakthrough point. They are instantly destroyed by drones. That's why the enemy has chosen this particular tactic, which is quite effective given their numerical superiority.
Dnipropetrovsk region. Why is it so important for Putin, so important, that Russian troops cross this administrative border with the Donetsk region? Besides the propaganda effect, is there any real point to a Russian soldier's boots stepping over this administrative border? Is there any strategic sense in the fact that some settlements will be occupied, or that the Russians are trying to occupy certain settlements already beyond the borders of the Dnipropetrovsk, Donetsk region?
Again, it's about negotiating position. Right now, we see that Trump is basically aiming, well, the main negotiation tactic is this: exchanging territories. That is, territory in exchange for peace. The more territory Putin controls now, the more land he holds on Ukrainian soil, the tougher the negotiating position he can offer. If there are any territories in the Dnipropetrovsk region under his control, he can say, look, I'll give you back the territories in Dnipropetrovsk, but you have to make concessions to me here, here, and here. So, it's purely a negotiating position. The more territory he controls, I mean Putin and the Russian army, the tougher the terms become.
How difficult is it right now overall? I'm not talking about the armed forces of Ukraine. There, it's clear that the situation is very tough. Even the general staff itself says so. But how hard is it, as Trump says, to pick out trump cards when it comes to political pressure? Because, as practice shows, yes, the Russian Federation's economy is currently in decline. Trump himself even says that. But Putin still manages to find resources to continue waging war against Ukraine. To what extent can we say now, if we're not talking only about military potential, only about putting pressure on Putin by military means? After all, President Zelensky has previously said that in the ideal so-called scenario for ending the war, it would still be a diplomatic settlement. How realistic is that?
Well, in any case, the basis of any negotiations is determined by successes or failures on the front lines. As I've already said, the negotiating position of either side is shaped precisely on the battlefield, in the combat zone. The front is broad, it's on land, on water, and deep within Russian territory. The front is wherever the front extends to, the front lies wherever Ukrainian drones can reach, to put it bluntly. So even our successful strikes on defense industry facilities in the Russian Federation can be factored into this negotiating position. And what happens on the ground is also very important. For example, right now we're discussing the situation around Dobropillia. We talked about the fact that if the enemy manages to expand the breakthrough and achieve success in this direction, they'll use it as an extra card on the negotiating table in Alaska. But if we manage to contain this offensive, stop this breakthrough, and achieve success there by defeating these Russian infantry groups, that will also be a plus for us at these negotiations. In other words, we'll be able to state that all attempts by the Russian Federation to break through the front near Pokrovsk are ending in failure.
Dennis, let's talk about the south. Ukrainian assault troops have cleared Stepnohursk in the Zaporizhia region of Russian occupiers. The 210th Separate Assault Regiment of the Ukrainian Armed Forces published a video of the combat operation.
We've also been seeing news from the main intelligence directorate and the security service of Ukraine that long-range drones are striking oil refineries deep inside Russian territory. How successful is this case as well, in terms of overcoming such long distances? Let me remind you, this involves bypassing air defense, bypassing electronic warfare systems, and in fact, hitting the target. To what extent can we also say this is a new step in the range capabilities of Ukrainian drones?
We've actually been using long-range drones against the strategic rear of the Russian Federation for quite a long time now. This didn't just start this year. It was happening last year as well, and the range of these drones was being increased. Now we've simply scaled up these efforts. We've started using more drones, a greater number of drones, across Russian territory. The geography has expanded significantly, and so has the number of targets we're trying to hit. And we're seeing the effects of this. We're seeing that the price of gasoline in Russia is going up. We're seeing a decrease in the level of oil refining. We're seeing that the budget is taking a hit. And if the budget is suffering, that means the funding for the Russian Federation's war is suffering too, because we know very well that this is a source of revenue. When the price of gasoline goes up, the population of the Russian Federation starts to feel the consequences of the war more acutely, and so on. In other words, logistics are getting worse. We're not just hitting oil refineries, we're also targeting stations, railway infrastructure, and we're disrupting air traffic in the Russian Federation. The carpet plan is constantly in effect. Dear Russians, your airports are regularly being shut down. We're also striking defense industry enterprises, and storage sites for shaheeds that are used to destroy and bomb our cities. So, the range and geography of our targets are now very broad, and they're constantly expanding.
Thank you for joining us on our broadcast.
Subscribe to UATV English and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.